Know your place, scholarship girl? Kyle said that before learning Janet's place was wherever she chose to stand. It started with a deliberate insult wrapped in false kindness. Kyle Davidson, owner of TechFit Dojo and Instagram sensation with 50,000 followers, had just kicked over Janet Washington's mop bucket during his Friday night live stream. Dirty water spread across the polished floor while his audience watched through phone cameras. Oops, Kyle smirked, not bothering to look at the quiet black woman in the faded scholarship program t-shirt. Looks like you missed a spot. The 20 students scattered around the dojo pretended to focus on their stretching, but everyone was watching. Everyone always watched when Kyle performed for his cameras. Janet Washington didn't flinch. Her hands remained steady on the mop handle, showing no tremor despite the public humiliation. "No problem, sir," she said quietly. "I'll handle it." What Kyle didn't know was that Janet Washington had been handling much worse for decades. The scholarship program had been Kyle's idea. Good optics, he'd told the board of directors. Community outreach, diversity initiatives, the kind of thing that looked excellent in grant applications and social media campaigns. Janet had been cleaning the dojo for 3 years before she qualified. Night shift, Monday through Friday, emptying trash cans and mopping floors while Kyle counted his daily earnings from private lessons and online courses. She'd watched hundreds of classes through the office window, never imagining she'd be allowed inside as anything other than hired help. The application process had been humiliating enough. 3 interviews, background checks, essays about personal growth goals, all for the privilege of training with people who looked through her like she was invisible. Now, 6 weeks into the program, Janet understood the real purpose. She was Kyle's living demonstration of charity, his proof that martial arts could elevate people from her background. She finished cleaning the spilled water and returned to her place at the back of the class. Kyle pocketed his phone and resumed the lesson. "Basic defensive stance," he announced, moving into position. "Notice how I distribute my weight evenly between both feet." Janet mimicked his posture, but her muscle memory made tiny adjustments. Her left foot shifted 2 inches back. Her hands dropped half an inch lower. Her center of gravity settled into her hips rather than her shoulders. Kyle noticed immediately. "Janet, you're overthinking it," he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of patient condescension. "This isn't complicated, just copy what I'm doing." "Yes, sensei," Janet replied, forcing her body back into Kyle's inferior position. Ashley Miller, a college student whose parents paid $200 monthly for unlimited classes, shot a quick glance toward Janet. Something in the older woman's automatic correction had looked professional. Kyle moved through the basic combinations: jab, cross, hook. Simple movements that most beginners struggled to coordinate. Janet followed along, deliberately clumsy, occasionally stumbling over footwork that should have been natural to anyone with her unconscious spatial awareness. But every few seconds, her body betrayed her. A defensive counter that appeared for a split second before she caught herself. A stance that briefly optimized for actual combat rather than demonstration. Hands that instinctively protected vulnerable pressure points. "Let's work on partner drills," Kyle announced. "Janet, since you're still learning the basics, you can observe today." The exclusion was subtle but absolute. Janet stepped back against the wall while the other students paired off. She watched them practice predetermined combinations, their movements safe and choreographed. Ashley Miller's partner was Marcus Brown, a software engineer whose form had improved dramatically over the past year. But as they worked through the drill, Ashley found herself distracted by the woman standing silently behind them. Janet's eyes tracked every movement with surgical precision. Not the casual observation of a beginner trying to learn, but the assessment of someone cataloging weaknesses and opportunities. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, even when Kyle made pointed corrections to other students' technique while deliberately ignoring her presence. "The scholarship program is about giving opportunities to people like you," Kyle had said during Janet's first class, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People who wouldn't normally have access to this level of instruction. Don't waste it. Waste." The message was clear. Be grateful, stay quiet, know your place. Janet had nodded politely. "I'm grateful for the chance to learn, sensei." But Ashley noticed how Janet's jaw tightened when Kyle turned away, how her hands, hanging loose at her sides, briefly formed shapes that looked nothing like the basic techniques they'd been taught. During water breaks, the other scholarship students, two teenagers from the community center program, gravitated toward Janet. She listened to their complaints about Kyle's teaching style with the patience of someone accustomed to taking care of others. "He doesn't really explain anything," whispered Marcus Johnson, the younger of the two boys. "Just tells us we're doing it wrong." "Keep practicing," Janet told him gently. "The muscle memory comes with time." Ashley, eavesdropping from across the room, noticed that Janet's advice was specific and technical. She knew which muscles to engage for better balance. She understood the physics of leverage and momentum. She spoke about combat principles with casual familiarity. Kyle, meanwhile, had returned to his phone. His Instagram story now included footage of the scholarship students integrating with our regular members. The narrative was one of generous instruction and grateful recipients. But Janet Washington didn't look grateful. She looked like someone exercising tremendous self-control. The class ended with Kyle's traditional closing remarks about discipline, respect, and the warrior spirit. Students bowed, collected their gear, and filtered toward the exit. Janet remained behind to begin her cleaning duties. Ashley lingered, pretending to organize her gym bag while watching Janet work. The transformation was immediate. The careful clumsiness disappeared. Janet moved with economic efficiency, her body flowing between tasks with zero wasted motion. She emptied trash cans with the same precise footwork Kyle had just demonstrated incorrectly. She wiped down equipment using leverage principles that most students never mastered. Every movement spoke of someone who understood their body as a finely tuned instrument. "Excuse me," Ashley said quietly, approaching Janet's work area. Janet looked up, mop in hand. "Need something, honey?" This doesn't feel right," Ashley said, glancing toward Kyle's office where he was counting the evening's cash receipts. Janet's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or warning. "What doesn't feel right?" Janet asked. Ashley struggled to articulate what she'd observed: the deliberate exclusions, the performative charity, the way Kyle filmed Janet's humiliation for social media content. "The way he treats you," Ashley finally said. Janet smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just here to learn, sweetheart. Same as you." But Ashley had seen enough to know that wasn't true. Janet Washington wasn't learning anything in Kyle Davidson's dojo. She was waiting. 3 weeks later, Kyle's Friday night live stream had become appointment viewing for his followers. Real Talk with Sensei Kyle featured unfiltered commentary about martial arts, social media, and whatever controversy might boost engagement. Tonight's topic: the scholarship program. "You guys have been asking about our diversity initiative," Kyle said, adjusting his phone's angle to capture the entire dojo. "Let me show you what we're dealing with." Janet was finishing her cleaning routine, unaware that Kyle had started broadcasting. She methodically wiped down the last of the training equipment, her movements economical and precise. "See, this is what happens when you try to help people who aren't naturally athletic," Kyle continued, his voice carrying across the studio. 3 months of training, and she still moves like she's afraid of her own shadow. Several students remained after regular class hours, either working on individual practice or socializing. They glanced nervously between Kyle's phone camera and Janet, who had stopped cleaning and was listening. "Janet, come over here," Kyle called out. "Show my followers what you've learned." She approached slowly, still holding her cleaning supplies. "I'm not really dressed for training, Sensei." "That's perfect," Kyle grinned. "Real self-defense happens in everyday clothes. Show them your basic stance." Janet set down her bucket and moved into position. Deliberately awkward, shoulders too high, feet too close together, the stance of someone who'd never thrown a punch in her life. Kyle's followers loved it. Comments flooded the live stream. "OMG, this is painful to watch, and she looks terrified, and why is she even there?" "Now throw a jab," Kyle instructed, stepping back to give his camera a better angle. Janet's punch was slow and telegraphed, her form textbook terrible. Kyle dodged it easily, then grabbed her wrist and twisted it into a basic joint lock. "See how easily someone with real training can control an untrained opponent?" he said to his camera. This is why our scholarship program focuses on self-awareness and personal safety rather than actual fighting skills. The humiliation was clinical and methodical. Kyle used Janet as a demonstration dummy, showing his followers how certain body types weren't suited for martial arts, how some people needed modified expectations. Janet submitted to each demonstration passively, her face expressionless. But Ashley Miller, watching from across the room, noticed her breathing, deep and controlled. The breathing of someone managing anger, not fear. Kyle released Janet's wrist and stepped back, still filming. The important thing is that everyone finds their appropriate level. Not everyone can be a warrior. What about her husband? Ashley said suddenly. The question cut through Kyle's monologue like a blade. Every head in the room turned toward Ashley, then toward Janet. Kyle's expression shifted. What did you say? Her husband, Ashley repeated, louder now. William Washington, didn't he used to teach here? Janet's composure cracked for the first time, a sharp intake of breath, her hands hanging at her sides briefly curled into fists. Kyle's face flushed. That's ancient history. I heard he was your instructor, Ashley continued, emboldened by the sudden tension in the room. Before you took over the dojo. William Washington was a decent teacher, Kyle said carefully, his live stream still running. But he had outdated ideas about martial arts, about who belonged in our community. Janet spoke for the first time since the demonstration began. William taught that martial arts was about making others stronger, not smaller. Her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly across the studio. Kyle's followers, still watching the live stream, sensed the shift in dynamics. Your husband thought he could teach honor, Kyle said, his camera still rolling. Look where that got him. The words hit Janet like a physical blow. Her husband had died 2 years ago, heart attack at 51, brought on by the stress of watching his life's work destroyed by his former student. William was twice the martial artist you'll ever be, Janet said, her voice still controlled but carrying steel underneath. Kyle laughed, playing to his camera. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air. Kyle's followers, watching through their screens, sensed they were witnessing something significant. The students present in the dojo shifted uncomfortably, recognizing they'd moved beyond teachable moments into personal territory. I'm just a scholarship student, Janet said carefully. You're a third-degree black belt. Exactly, Kyle replied, which makes this a perfect teaching opportunity. Tomorrow night, full contact sparring. Everyone's invited to watch. He turned to his phone camera, grinning. 50,000 people just heard that challenge, folks. Tomorrow night, we settle this debate about who belongs in martial arts. Janet looked around the room. 20 pairs of eyes watched her, waiting for her response. Ashley Miller nodded encouragingly. The 2 scholarship teenagers looked terrified. What are the terms? Janet asked. Kyle's grin widened. When you lose, you make a video confession. Tell everyone that you understand your limitations, that you know your place. And if I win? Kyle laughed. You won't. But if some miracle happens, I'll establish a memorial scholarship in William's name, full funding for 10 students annually. Janet considered this. William had always dreamed of expanding access to martial arts education. A memorial scholarship would honor everything he'd believed in. No rules, she said quietly. No referee. Just you and me. Kyle's eyes lit up. Even better. My followers love authentic content. He extended his hand for a shake, still filming. Janet grasped it firmly. Kyle squeezed harder than necessary, trying to establish dominance. Janet's grip remained steady, neither yielding nor escalating. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Kyle announced to his camera. You're going to see why martial arts has traditional hierarchies, why some people need to understand their place in the natural order. Janet released his hand and picked up her cleaning supplies. I'll be here. As she walked toward the storage closet, Kyle called after her. Bring a camera crew if you want. This is going to be educational for everyone. Janet didn't respond, but Ashley Miller saw her shoulders straighten slightly. For just a moment, her posture shifted into something that looked nothing like a frightened scholarship student. The live stream ended with Kyle's promise to his followers. Tomorrow night would be unforgettable. Comments poured in with predictions, jokes, and occasional voices of concern. But nobody in that room, not Kyle, not his students, not his thousands of followers, understood what they'd just witnessed. they'd just watched a predator accept an invitation to hunt. The next morning, Kyle's Instagram account buzzed with activity. His challenge video had been shared across martial arts forums, local community groups, and social media platforms. The narrative was already forming. Successful instructor teaches humility to ungrateful scholarship recipient. TechFit Dojo's phone rang constantly. Students wanting to confirm the time. Parents asking if their children should attend. Local martial arts instructors requesting details about the exhibition match. Kyle loved every minute of it. He spent the morning preparing the space, moving equipment to create a larger fighting area, professional lighting for optimal camera angles, multiple phone tripods for different perspectives. This would be content gold. "You really going through with this?" asked Tom Wilson, Kyle's assistant instructor and longtime friend. "She asked for it," Kyle replied, adjusting a camera position. "I'm just giving her what she wanted." Tom looked uncomfortable. "Man, she's like 50 years old and she's never been in a real fight." "That's the point," Kyle said. "People need to understand their limitations. It's actually merciful when you think about it." By afternoon, word had spread throughout the local martial arts community. Students from other dojos planned to attend. The narrative was irresistible. David versus Goliath, except this time Goliath was supposed to win. Janet arrived for her regular cleaning shift at 6 p.m., 2 hours before the scheduled match. She worked methodically through her routine, showing no signs of nervousness or preparation, no stretching, no warming up, no visible anxiety. Ashley Miller arrived early with her parents, who'd insisted on witnessing the spectacle. They expected to see a brief, educational demonstration of why martial arts required proper training and realistic expectations. By 7:30, the dojo was packed. 60 people crowded into a space designed for 30. Students, parents, local instructors, and curiosity seekers filled every available spot. Multiple phones captured every angle. Kyle held court in the center of the room, explaining the educational value of what was about to happen. "This isn't about humiliation," he announced to the crowd. "This is about understanding reality. Martial arts isn't a fantasy. It requires natural ability, years of dedicated training, and physical gifts that not everyone possesses." He gestured toward Janet, who sat quietly on a bench near the wall, still wearing her cleaning uniform. "Janet is about to learn something valuable about herself and her place in this community. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone understand their limitations." Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Ashley Miller's mother whispered to her husband, "This feels wrong." But Kyle continued building his narrative. "The terms are simple. Full contact, no rules, no referee. When Janet loses, she'll make a public video acknowledging that she overestimated her abilities. It's actually a gift, helping her avoid future embarrassment." "And if she wins?" someone called from the back. Kyle's laugh was genuine. "If some miracle occurs and she somehow doesn't lose immediately, I'll establish the William Washington Memorial Scholarship, full funding for 10 students annually in perpetuity." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Win or lose, the outcome would benefit the community. Janet stood up slowly, removing her cleaning smock to reveal a simple t-shirt and jeans underneath. No protective gear, no martial arts uniform, no signs of preparation. "You sure about the no rules part?" she asked Kyle quietly. "Absolutely," he replied, grinning for his cameras. "I want this to be as authentic as possible." Janet nodded. "Just checking." Kyle stripped to his training shorts and t-shirt, revealing a physique maintained through daily workouts and performance-enhancing supplements. At 32, he was in the best shape of his life. 6'2", 200 pounds of muscle and ego. Janet, by contrast, looked exactly like what she was. A 50-year-old woman who cleaned buildings for a living. 5'6", maybe 140 pounds, with the soft edges that came from years of night shifts and cafeteria food. The mismatch was so obvious that several parents began reconsidering whether their children should witness what was about to happen. Kyle took his position in the center of the fighting area, bouncing on his toes and rolling his shoulders. Performance energy for his audience. Janet walked to the opposite side of the space, her movement economical and purposeful. No showboating, no dramatic preparation. She simply stood there waiting. "Everyone ready?" Kyle called out, playing to his crowd. Janet nodded once. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of recording devices. 60 people held their breath, waiting to see how quickly this would end. What they didn't know was that Janet Washington had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. 2 years earlier, William Washington had been everything Kyle Davidson pretended to be. A true martial artist, a teacher who measured success by his students' character rather than their tournament victories. A man who understood that real strength meant making others stronger. He'd opened his community dojo with savings from 20 years of military service. Special Forces medic, 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, the kind of quiet professional who never talked about what he'd seen but carried it in the careful way he moved through the world. William had met Janet at the VA hospital where she worked as a trauma nurse. Both of them were healing from their own wars, his physical, hers psychological. She'd served as a combat medic with a classified unit, the kind of assignment that didn't appear on public records and couldn't be discussed at dinner parties. Their courtship had been built on shared silence, understanding what it meant to have taken lives in service of saving others, the weight of decisions made in seconds that echoed for decades. William's dojo became Janet's sanctuary. After her discharge and struggles with PTSD, she'd chosen invisibility. Night shift jobs, modest apartments, the kind of life that left no digital footprint and attracted no attention. But in William's dojo, teaching children and teenagers from their neighborhood, she'd found purpose again. Not as an instructor, her background was too classified, too dangerous to explain, but as a quiet presence who helped kids with homework and listened to their problems. Kyle Davidson had been William's most promising student. Athletically gifted, charismatic, hungry for advancement. William had seen potential for leadership and invested heavily in Kyle's development. The problems started slowly. Kyle's attitude toward female students, his dismissive comments about certain types of people who wanted to train. His belief that martial arts was about proving superiority rather than building character. William addressed these issues privately at first, then more directly as Kyle's behavior worsened. The final break came when Kyle refused to teach a class of refugees from Somalia, claiming they were culturally incompatible with traditional martial arts. Real warriors make others stronger, not smaller, William had told Kyle during their last conversation. Kyle's response had been swift and devastating. Using his social media following and connections in the regional martial arts community, he spread rumors about William's teaching methods, his financial management, his military record. The attacks were subtle but effective. Questions about whether William's military service qualified him to teach civilian students. Suggestions that his outdated ideas about inclusion were holding back serious martial artists. Within 6 months, William's dojo was struggling. Students left for more progressive schools, meaning Kyle's newly opened tech-fit facility. Corporate sponsors withdrew support. The community center that hosted his youth programs found other priorities. William tried to fight back with truth and dignity. He organized demonstrations of traditional techniques. He invited other instructors to observe his classes. He maintained his principles even as his life's work crumbled around him. The stress killed him at 51, heart attack while preparing for a board meeting that would determine whether his dojo could keep its lease. Janet had found him collapsed in his office, surrounded by student progress reports and scholarship applications. His last act had been updating the files of kids he'd been teaching for free, making sure their training could continue even without him. The funeral was sparsely attended. Kyle Davidson sent flowers with a card expressing condolences for a decent man who tried his best. Janet had watched from the back of the chapel as William's students, mostly teenagers from the community center programs, served as pallbearers. Kids he'd taught to defend themselves, to respect others, to understand that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. After the burial, Janet had made 2 decisions. First, she would never again use the skills that had made her valuable to military special operations. That part of her life was finished, buried with the only person who'd understood what those skills had cost her. Second, she would take the night cleaning job at Kyle Davidson's dojo, not for revenge. Revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford with her PTSD and her need for invisibility, but for witness, to see what Kyle built on the foundation of William's destroyed reputation. For 2 years, she'd mopped Kyle's floors and emptied his trash cans. She'd listened to his students complain about his teaching methods. She'd watched him use martial arts as a vehicle for his ego rather than a tool for building character. She'd also watched him struggle with techniques that William had tried to teach him years earlier. Kyle's flashy combinations looked impressive, but left him vulnerable to counters that any properly trained fighter would exploit. His fitness was cosmetic, built for appearance rather than function. His confidence was brittle, dependent on maintaining an image of superiority over carefully selected opponents. When the scholarship program opened, Janet had applied not because she needed training, but because she needed access. To understand fully what Kyle had built and how completely he'd corrupted everything William had taught him. The humiliations were a small price to pay for proximity. Every condescending comment, every deliberate exclusion, every moment of performed charity gave her additional insight into Kyle's character. More importantly, it gave her time to decide whether Kyle Davidson was someone who could be redeemed or someone who needed to be stopped. Tonight would provide that answer. Janet finished her shift and changed clothes in the storage closet. She rolled her shoulders once, feeling the familiar weight of old injuries and older decisions. Her hands, soft from 2 years of cleaning products and administrative work, still remembered the precise pressure points that could stop a human heart or temporarily paralyze voluntary muscle control. She thought about William's final words to Kyle. Real warriors make others stronger, not smaller. Tonight, Kyle would learn the difference between a martial artist and a soldier, between someone who fought for trophies and someone who fought for people who couldn't protect themselves. Janet Washington stepped out of the storage closet and walked toward a reckoning that was 2 years overdue. The crowd fell silent as Janet and Kyle moved to opposite sides of the fighting area. Phones captured every angle. Social media streams broadcasted the moment to thousands of viewers who expected to witness a predictable lesson in reality. Kyle bounced on his toes, rolling his shoulders and shaking out his hands. Classic pre-fight ritual, designed as much for intimidation as preparation. His muscles were pumped from a quick warm-up, his breathing elevated with performance adrenaline. Janet stood perfectly still. Her breathing was deep and controlled, the rhythm of someone managing their autonomic nervous system through conscious effort. Her hands hung loose at her sides, neither defensive nor aggressive. "Whenever you're ready," Kyle announced, loud enough for his cameras to capture. The first exchange revealed everything. Kyle opened with a textbook combination, jab, cross, hook, executed with speed and precision. Moves that would overwhelm most beginners, demonstrate his technical superiority, and end the exhibition quickly. Janet slipped the jab with minimal movement, deflected the cross with an open palm, and caught the hook on her forearm. 3 defensive actions that required zero effort while completely neutralizing Kyle's offense. But to the crowd, it looked like lucky instincts. Kyle had missed, that was all. Kyle reset and attacked again, this time with a front kick followed by a spinning back fist. Flashy techniques that demonstrated his flexibility and athletic ability. Janet sidestepped the kick and ducked under the spinning strike, her movements so economical they appeared almost accidental. Kyle's momentum carried him slightly past her position, forcing him to turn and reset. "Stop running," Kyle said, loud enough for his audience to hear. "I'm not running," Janet replied quietly. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Kyle was clearly the aggressor, Janet the reluctant defender. The narrative matched their expectations. Kyle's third assault was more aggressive, a flurry of punches and kicks designed to overwhelm and corner his opponent. His technique was solid, his speed impressive, his intent unmistakable. Janet absorbed the attack like water flowing around rocks. She slipped, parried, and redirected each strike with movements so subtle they were barely visible. Kyle's combinations dissolved into empty air and missed connections, but she never countered, never attacked, never showed aggression or malice. Ashley Miller, watching from the front row, began to understand what she was seeing. Janet wasn't defending herself randomly. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, precise. She was analyzing Kyle's patterns while expending minimal energy. Kyle's breathing became labored. Throwing punches into air required the same energy as hitting targets but provided none of the satisfaction. His combinations grew sloppier as frustration replaced tactical thinking. "Fight back!" someone called from the crowd. Janet glanced toward the voice. I am fighting! Her response confused the audience. She was clearly losing. Kyle dominated the space, controlled the pace, demonstrated superior technique. Janet looked like someone trying not to get hurt rather than someone trying to win. Kyle sensed the crowd's restlessness and escalated his efforts. Higher kicks, longer combinations, more aggressive angles. His martial arts training was evident in every movement, but something was wrong with the execution. Janet continued her defensive display, but patterns emerged for those who knew how to look. She consistently moved Kyle toward his weaker side. She absorbed his energy while conserving her own. She cataloged his tendencies and reflexes with the systematic attention of someone conducting an assessment. After 5 minutes of one-sided aggression, Kyle paused to catch his breath. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool evening air. His movements had lost their crispness. "You can't run forever," he panted. "I'm not running," Janet repeated, her breathing still controlled and steady. The crowd grew uncomfortable. This wasn't the quick demonstration they'd expected. Kyle clearly dominated the exchange, but something about Janet's calm demeanor suggested she wasn't as helpless as she appeared. Kyle attacked again, this time with techniques borrowed from mixed martial arts. Takedown attempts, grappling holds, submissions designed to end the fight through superior size and strength. Janet's responses revealed new dimensions of her skill set. She defended takedowns with perfect balance and leverage. She escaped submission attempts before Kyle could properly establish them. Her movements remained defensive, but demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond basic self-defense. Tom Wilson, Kyle's assistant instructor, leaned toward Ashley Miller's father. "She knows what she's doing," he whispered. Kyle heard the comment and his face flushed with anger. The crowd was beginning to murmur, questions about who Janet really was, where she'd learned to move like that, why Kyle couldn't land anything solid despite his obvious advantages. "Stop playing games," Kyle shouted. For the first time since the exhibition began, Janet smiled. "I'm not playing, son," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I'm teaching." The words hit Kyle like a physical blow. Teaching was his domain, his authority, his identity. This scholarship student, this cleaning lady, had no right to claim that role. Kyle's next attack abandoned technique entirely, wild punches fueled by ego and frustration rather than tactical thinking. He swung for maximum damage rather than optimal effectiveness. Janet's response was different, not just defensive anymore, but educational. She caught Kyle's wild right hand at the wrist, stepped inside his range, and applied a standing arm lock that immobilized his entire upper body. For 3 seconds, Kyle couldn't move at all. Then she released him and stepped back. "Overcommitment leaves you vulnerable," she said calmly. Kyle stared at her, breathing hard. The crowd had gone completely silent. "Who are you?" Ashley Miller called out. Janet didn't answer, but her posture had subtly changed. The careful clumsiness was gone. Her stance was balanced and ready. Her hands, while not threatening, were positioned for instant response. Kyle recognized the transformation and felt the first flutter of real concern. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice less confident than before. "You asked me to prove that William was twice the martial artist you'll ever be," Janet replied. "I'm working on that." Kyle's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. The crowd sensed the shift in dynamics. Phones continued recording, but the narrative was no longer what anyone had expected. For the first time in the exhibition, Kyle looked uncertain. He'd thrown everything he had at an opponent who absorbed it effortlessly. His techniques had been neutralized by someone who claimed to be learning from him. The predator was beginning to suspect he might be the prey. Janet stood calmly in the center of the fighting area, no longer hiding who she really was. "Shall we continue?" she asked. Kyle's desperation manifested as rage. The careful facade of the professional instructor cracked completely, revealing something ugly underneath. "I don't know who you think you are," he snarled, "but this ends now." He launched himself at Janet with complete commitment, abandoning all pretense of technique or control. His right hand formed a fist aimed directly at her head, not a sparring technique, but an assault intended to cause serious injury. In that moment, Kyle Davidson revealed exactly who he'd always been beneath the martial arts philosophy and social media persona. Someone who used his size and training to hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. Janet's response was instantaneous and surgical. She stepped inside Kyle's wild swing, her left hand rising to deflect his arm, while her right moved with mechanical precision toward his solar plexus. Not a punch, not a strike, but a precise application of pressure that required intimate knowledge of human anatomy. Her fingertips found the exact spot where the phrenic nerve cluster could be temporarily disrupted, a technique taught to special operations medics for field anesthesia when proper medical equipment wasn't available. Kyle's body seized. His diaphragm stopped responding to voluntary control. His legs buckled as his nervous system struggled to process what had happened. He collapsed to his knees, conscious but unable to draw breath properly. His hands clawed at his chest as panic set in, the primal terror of suffocation. The crowd erupted in shocked voices, but Janet remained calm. "That's called a medic's touch," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly chaotic room. "Temporary paralysis of the respiratory muscle group. You'll be fine in 10 minutes, but you won't be able to fight for several hours." Kyle tried to speak, but could only make strangled, gasping sounds. His face flushed red as he struggled against his body's rebellion. "Who are you?" Tom Wilson demanded, pushing through the crowd toward them. Janet looked down at Kyle, who was slowly regaining control of his breathing, but remained on his knees, no longer a threat to anyone. "Someone William tried to teach you to recognize," she said. Kyle's eyes widened with understanding and something that might have been recognition. Between gasping breaths, he managed to whisper, "Military." Janet nodded. "Special forces, combat medic, classified operations that don't appear on public records." The room fell completely silent except for Kyle's labored breathing and the soft sound of phones recording everything. "Your husband," Kyle gasped, finally able to form words. "He never told me." "William respected my privacy," Janet replied. "He understood that some people choose invisibility for good reasons." Ashley Miller stood up from her seat in the front row. "You've been holding back this entire time?" "I've been hoping Kyle would remember what William tried to teach him," Janet said. "That martial arts isn't about proving you're superior to other people. It's about making sure everyone gets home safely." Kyle slowly climbed to his feet, his breathing returning to normal, but his confidence completely shattered. For the first time in his adult life, he'd encountered someone who could have killed him without effort, but chose mercy instead. "I could have ended this in the first 10 seconds, Janet continued, "but that wouldn't have taught you anything. William always said that real warriors make others stronger, not smaller." Kyle looked around the room at the 60 faces watching him, his students, his colleagues, his social media audience. All of them had witnessed his complete defeat by someone he'd dismissed as unworthy of respect, but they'd also seen something else, genuine mercy from someone who had no obligation to show it. "I'm sorry," Kyle said quietly. For the first time all evening, Janet smiled. "That's a good start." Kyle Davidson sat heavily on the bench where Janet had waited before their match. His breathing had returned to normal, but his worldview required major reconstruction. "I need to understand something," he said, looking up at Janet, who stood calmly nearby. "If you could have stopped me any time, why did you let me humiliate you for months?" Janet considered the question carefully. The crowd remained silent, still processing what they'd witnessed. "Because I needed to know if you could be saved," she replied. "William saw potential in you once. I wanted to understand if that potential still existed." Kyle's face flushed with shame. "And your conclusion? Tonight you attacked an opponent you knew was weaker than you, intending to cause serious harm," Janet said. "But when you realized you'd misjudged the situation, your first response was an apology. That suggests you can still learn." Tom Wilson approached them cautiously. "Janet, I owe you an apology, too. We all do." "No," Janet shook her head. "You responded to the information you had. Kyle created a narrative, and I chose not to correct it." "The fault isn't yours." Ashley Miller's father stood up from his seat. "What happens now?" Kyle looked around the room at his students, his colleagues, the cameras that had recorded his defeat and transformation. His social media following would see everything. His reputation as an unbeatable instructor was finished. "I honor our agreement," he said quietly. "The William Washington Memorial Scholarship. Full funding for 10 students annually." That's generous, Janet replied, but not what William would have wanted. Kyle looked confused. What do you mean? Janet walked to the center of the fighting area, addressing the entire crowd. William believed that martial arts should be available to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. He never charged students who couldn't afford lessons, and he never made anyone feel small for needing help. She looked directly at Kyle. If you want to honor his memory, make that the foundation of how you teach. Not charity for people you consider beneath you, but genuine respect for everyone who walks through these doors. Kyle nodded slowly. I can do that. Prove it, Janet said. Starting tomorrow, restructure your programs. Sliding scale tuition based on need, not tokenism. Instruction focused on character development, not ego gratification. Teaching that makes people stronger, not just technically proficient. And if I fail? Janet's expression grew serious. Then I'll be back, and next time, I won't be interested in teaching lessons. The threat was delivered with such quiet certainty that Kyle didn't doubt her sincerity. I understand, he said. Ashley Miller approached them. Can I ask you something personal? Janet nodded. Why cleaning jobs? Why invisibility? With your background, you could have done anything. Janet smiled sadly. Combat medics see too much death. Sometimes the only way to heal is to spend your time taking care of things instead of taking lives. Cleaning is honest work that helps people. It gave me peace. But you could have taught martial arts, like William. My military service was classified for good reasons, Janet explained. The techniques I learned weren't designed for sport or self-improvement. They were designed to kill people efficiently. William understood that distinction. Tom Wilson stepped forward. Would you consider teaching here? Properly, I mean, as an instructor. Janet looked around the room, seeing the faces of students who'd witnessed something transformative. Kyle's humiliation had become everyone's education about respect, assumptions, and the difference between strength and power. I'll make you a deal, she said. I'll help Kyle restructure the programs and teach occasional seminars on practical self-defense. But I remain Janet Washington, night shift cleaner. My military background stays private. Why? Ashley asked. Because the most important lesson you can learn about protection is that it often comes from people you never see coming, Janet replied. Real security doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when needed. Kyle stood up, extending his hand. Partners? Janet grasped it firmly. Partners. But Kyle? Yes? The first time you use your position to make someone feel small, our partnership ends. Permanently. Understood. The crowd began to disperse, but the conversations continued in small groups throughout the dojo. Students processed what they learned about assumptions, respect, and the difference between appearing strong and being strong. Ashley Miller lingered until most people had left. Janet, can I ask one more thing? Of course, honey. The Memorial Scholarship. Will it really honor William's memory? Janet looked around the dojo, imagining it transformed according to William's original vision. A place where strength meant protecting others, where martial arts built character instead of feeding egos, where everyone was welcomed regardless of their background or ability to pay. William always said that a warrior's greatest victory is the fight they choose not to finish, she replied. Tonight, Kyle learned that lesson. If he applies it going forward, then yes, this will honor William's memory perfectly. 3 months later, TechFit Dojo had been quietly transformed. The sliding scale tuition program served 40 students who couldn't afford traditional rates. Kyle's social media content focused on character development rather than physical dominance. The William Washington Memorial Scholarship supported 15 students in its first year. Janet Washington continued her night cleaning shift, arriving each evening after regular classes ended. But now students occasionally stayed late to ask questions, seek advice, or simply talk with someone who understood that real strength meant making others feel safe. Kyle Davidson discovered that teaching respect and humility to his students made him a better martial artist than dominating them ever had. His reputation transformed from Instagram celebrity to genuine educator. And in the corner of the dojo, a simple plaque honored William Washington's memory with his favorite quote, "Real warriors make others stronger, not smaller." Janet cleaned around it each night, remembering the man who'd taught her that healing was possible, that service was honorable, and that the most dangerous warriors were the ones who chose not to fight. Some battles were won not through superior technique, but through superior character. The dojo closed each night with the same quiet dignity it had gained through one woman's choice to remain invisible until invisibility was no longer enough.